Okay, let's dive right in. Today we're talking about a really crucial piece of Scottish law, something that's super important if you've ever had medical treatment. It's called the Hunter v. Hanley test, and it's the rule that decides what counts as medical negligence. So this is the big question, isn't it? We all go to doctors hoping for the best, but sometimes things go wrong. So when does a medical mistake, or just a bad outcome, cross that legal line and actually become negligence, specifically here in Scotland? Well, you might think the answer is buried in some modern, complicated legal textbook, but it's not. The answer actually comes from this one single, pretty dramatic story that happened almost 70 years ago, and it all started with a broken needle. And that brings us to part one. We're going to look at the legacy of that broken needle and uncover the story of the one case that pretty much defined the law as we know it today. So here's the story in a nutshell. Back in 1955 in Lanarkshire, a patient, Mrs. Hunter, was getting an injection from her doctor, Dr. Hanley. Pretty routine stuff. But during the injection, the needle snapped and she was injured. She argued that the doctor had been negligent, and that one claim, well, it set a legal precedent that has shaped Scottish law ever since. So what happened next? Well, the case ended up in Scotland's highest civil court, and the judge, Lord President Clyde, delivered what we now know was a landmark ruling. He didn't just decide on the case, he created a super clear three-part test for figuring out professional negligence. And this is it. This is the test he came up with. To prove negligence, you have to satisfy all three of these steps. First, you have to show there's a normal way of doing the procedure. Second, you show the doctor didn't do it that way. But, and this is a huge but, it's that third step that's the real challenge, and it's the most important part. You know, the judge's own words really hit the nail on the head. He made it crystal clear. Just doing something differently doesn't automatically equal negligence. The mistake has to be so bad that no other reasonably competent professional acting with normal care would have ever made it. That's the bar. So let's dig into that third step a little more, because this, right here, is the absolute heart of the matter. It's the hurdle where most medical negligence claims in Scotland are either won or lost. It all comes down to this idea of the standard of care. Now, it's so important to get this. The law does not demand perfection from doctors. It doesn't even demand the best possible result every single time. What it demands is the level of skill you'd expect from a reasonably competent professional in that same field. So what does that actually look like in the real world? Well, first off, just because you had a bad outcome, that doesn't prove anything legally. The law understands that medicine isn't black and white. It protects a doctor's reasonable judgment. You know, two fantastic doctors might look at the same problem and choose two different but still valid ways to treat it. The ultimate question the court asks is this: was the action taken something that no competent professional would have done? And to answer that, you almost always need another medical expert to give their professional opinion. It's also really worth pointing out that this is a uniquely Scottish test. Now, England has its own version. It's called the Bolam test, which came a couple of years later. It's similar, but it's not identical. So if you're pursuing a claim in Scotland, it is the Hunter v. Hanley rules that matter. And that's exactly why getting local legal advice is so critical. All right, so let's move on from the theory and history. How does this almost 70-year-old test actually work in practice for claims being made in Scotland right now? Well, its reach is incredibly broad. We're talking about the exact same three-part standard being used to look at everything from surgical mistakes and misdiagnoses to potential negligence by your GP, your dentist, or even in prescribing the wrong medication. And for anyone who thinks they might have a claim, the path forward follows a really clear pattern. Step one always is to get a complete copy of your medical records. Then, those records are sent to an independent medical expert, someone in the same field, for their opinion. And only if that expert thinks the standard of care wasn't met do you move forward with a specialist solicitor. Now, here's a number that everyone, and I mean everyone, needs to remember: 3. Generally speaking, you have a strict 3-year time limit from the date of the incident to start a claim. But, and this is a really important but, there is a key exception. It's called the date of knowledge. Basically, if there was no way you could have reasonably known at the time that the treatment had caused you harm, that 3-year clock might only start ticking from the day you found out. It can get complicated, but it's a critical detail. Okay, so let's wrap this all up and bring it back to you. What are the most important things for any patient in Scotland to take away from all of this? Here's the bottom line. First, the Hunter v. Hanley test is the one and only legal standard in Scotland. Second,
It is a tough test. It was designed to be demanding. Because of that, getting a supportive opinion from a medical expert is the absolute foundation of any strong case. And finally, with that 3-year clock always ticking, acting fast and getting advice from a specialist Scottish solicitor is absolutely essential.
And that leaves us with this one last question to think about. The test was clearly designed to protect good medical professionals from unfair claims just because of a bad outcome, and that's a fair goal. But it's worth asking, in doing that, does it set the bar too high for patients who have genuinely been harmed and are just looking for justice? That's the incredibly delicate balance this law tries to strike.